Good afternoon, or good morning. This is Dan Duncan, Vice President of Impact Strategies for Community Technology, a company that you may be aware offers web-based software for funders to help drive their community impact work, their grant making, and their outcomes reporting. The webinar today is based on advanced outcomes. Again, I did a webinar a couple weeks ago on Outcomes 101. A number of you attended, but most did not. So I'm going to do a quick overview and then move forward into advanced outcomes as we move forward. Again, we will provide opportunities for questions, either typing them in or taking your phone or your microphone off of mute as we go through the process. This webinar and the thoughts I'm going to talk about is based on my 30-plus years as a funder, primarily as a United Way professional. So much of this is based on my work as a United Way professional working in the community impact and the grant management arena. In addition, I'm an adjunct faculty member of the Asset-Based Community Development Institute at Northwestern University. Some of you may be familiar with that organization. And so our work based on asset-based community development also drives and informs my work that I'm going to talk about today during the webinar. To set the stage, what I'm going to talk about is helping understand the difference between community level data and program outcome data, some ideas on how to best identify the community level indicators and data required to drive your impact agenda, collect the data you need to drive your agenda. I'm going to show you some examples of that and examples of strategies and data collection ideas, and then finally talk a little bit about technology to help you do this work in today's environment, in today's world. But before we get started, I'd like to do a couple polls just to find out who's on the webinar, on the call with us today. So let's start with, who do we have around the table today? Are you representing a United Way, a community foundation, or an other organization, if you will? All right, looks like most of you have voted. And the results are about a third are United Ways, about 6% community foundations, and another almost third are other. So thank you very much for that. The second poll question is, where is your organization on the outcomes tracking journey? Just starting, in the murky middle, or on track but wanting to fine-tune your efforts? All right. As you can see, about 10% are just starting, the majority are in the murky middle, and almost a third are on track, but wanting to fine-tune your efforts. Thank you very much. And now the final question. So to help us really get the word out about these webinars that we host each month, if you could let us know how you heard about this, through the emails that we send you from a colleague, social media. We're starting to use more and more LinkedIn and other activities to get the word out. All right, looks like you've all voted, and here are the results. About two-thirds from the initial email and about another third were referred from a colleague. So thank you very much for kind of setting the stage for our webinar today. So if our goal is to create significant measurable change, community change, that's really, I think, what we're all about as funders or organizations, nonprofits in the community. As we begin to do this, I think there's some key assumptions that really help, I think, drive our work. The first one is that effective organizations are learning organizations that know how to effectively collect and utilize data to make the mid-course corrections necessary. So I think we all agree with that, hopefully start with that perspective, that we need to be learning organizations. We need to be able to use data effectively to drive our work and make the mid-course corrections that are important for that. The second one is that it takes a wide variety of strategies and activities to achieve community change. It takes programs, services. It also takes neighborhood development, community engagement activities, public policy, a whole host of things that I'll talk a little bit about. In fact, next week on Valentine's Day, on the 14th, I'm doing another webinar specifically about community-based strategies. I'll talk a little bit more about that webinar later, but there's two things we need to do to be effective. One is focus on programs. Two is focus on community. Both of those are required to make the changes that are necessary. And finally, we need to be able to measure the impact of everything we do at the community strategy and program level. And that's why outcomes tracking is so important. because we need to be able to do that if we're going to be held accountable. So understanding the difference between community level data and program outcome data, because they really are two different things. But before we can do that, it's very important that we have a common vocabulary, if you will, a common knowledge. One of the things I've seen over the years that's caused a lot of confusion between grantors and grantees, your agencies, the programs and services and strategies that you fund, is sometimes outcomes tracking is hard to do because we haven't taken the time to make sure that we all agree to the language, agree to the definitions. So I'm going to go through and highlight just kind of my definitions, and I think a large segment of the funder world uses these definitions, but I just want to be clear about them because that really helps us drive our strategies. So the first one is community-wide population level data. And a part of that is because most funders today understand and have really clearly become focused, that we can't solve all problems. We can't be all things to all people. We have to be focused. So most funders have developed community-wide impact statements or impact goals, where they're looking at what are those key issues that we're trying to focus on in a community related to the quality of life and changing lives for people, whether that's again around income, education, or health in the world of United Ways. So some examples would be the Annie Casey Foundation. All children need and deserve lifelong connections to a safe and caring family. Here in Austin, Texas, where we're located, the Austin City Connection, promote community-wide wellness. And for those of you that are United Ways, you're very familiar with the goals for the common good, the United Ways goals around education, income, and health. Education, to cut by half the number of students who drop out. Income, cut by half the number of financially unstable low-income families, etc. So those are the goals that we set at the community-wide level. And community-wide data, the data that tells us about this, whether we are making a difference in this arena, is that data and indicators are collected from community-wide data, not agency data. One of the confusions I've seen is that many organizations try to roll up their individual program data into that community-wide indicator, and you really can't do that. What you have to do is find ways to collect that data at the community-wide level, at the national level, and drill it down to your local community. So individual agencies should not and cannot be held accountable for those changes in the overall community-wide results, which is why one of the reasons you can't roll up agency data. Because while they contribute, they are not individually responsible, because as I said earlier, it takes a wide range of strategies and community activities to really make a difference at the community level. So individual agencies should not be held responsible for that, but they should and must be held accountable for their results as they move forward. That's very important that we do that, is hold everyone accountable, because that's the only way we know that we're making a difference. So again, if we're talking about graduation rates and our goal is to change the graduation rate in our community, we're collecting that data from the school districts, if you will. And so an individual agency cannot be held responsible for changing the overall graduation rate. But if they have a program where they're serving 100 kids and their goal is to make sure that 80% of them graduate on time, then that agency should and must be held accountable to make sure that that 80% is achieved, or that they are. And that's why data becomes so important, so they can fine-tune the work they're doing, make mid-course corrections so they can be successful in achieving their outcomes that they identified. So again, community-wide data collected at the community-wide level, not at the program level. So some examples of community-wide data around census data, for example, poverty, household median income, home ownership, school district data, graduation rate, test scores, average GPAs, the percent of students on free and reduced lunches. All of those are data sets that you can collect at the community-wide level. Around the health issue, maybe potentially health department data, CDC data, hospital admissions, obesity rates, those kinds of things, so that you can begin to look at your changes at your local community relative to the community-wide data. So now let's drill down with some definitions around the strategy program level data. The first one is outputs. And outputs measure the magnitude of an activity of a program, service, or strategy. So at the outputs, we're measuring the number of people served, the number of hours of services provided, the amount of resources provided. As I think you're all aware, it doesn't tell us anything about the impact or the outcome. All it's talking about is the productivity around a different program, service, or strategy. Some examples would be the number of youth participating in the after-school program during the year, the hours of counseling provided during the school year, or the amount of emergency assistance provided during the year. Those are all examples of outputs. Outcomes, this is where we begin to look at the impact of our work, because outcomes are changes in behaviors, attitudes, knowledge, or circumstances for individuals or populations as a direct result of participating in an agency's program or in a strategy. And so outcomes are really the changes that have occurred. Samples of outcomes are the youth in the program will improve their academic performance, or individuals in the program will maintain employment for 6 months. So that becomes the outcomes, which is just measuring or just looking at what are we trying to achieve, what changes are we trying to have occur. So the next level is indicators. An indicator is a measure, which helps quantify an output or outcome. So indicators then become definable, quantifiable, measurable, and collectible. An outcome in and of itself is not measurable. The outcome only becomes measurable when you add the indicator to it. How are we going to measure that we are, in fact, making a difference? So sample indicators at the output level is the number of youth in the program or the number of hours of counseling provided. At the outcomes level, it's the number of youth who improve their academic performance as measured by the increase in their GPA, or the number/percent of program participants who will remain employed for 6 months as measured through a 6-month follow-up survey. So that becomes the indicator. How are we going to measure? What is the data we're going to use to know whether we have, in fact, made a difference relative to the outcome? And targets now are the goals set for each program or services, outputs, or outcomes. So targets become the number of clients or units of service projected to be served, or the number of percent of your clients that will achieve the identified outcome/indicator. So targets are how we add the accountability piece in. That's where we're really setting our goals. By setting targets, do we expect 80% to be better and learn new skills and improve their circumstances, or 20%, whatever that may be? So sample targets are 1,245 youth will participate in the after-school program. 4,500 hours of counseling will be provided during the school year. Outcomes, 75% of students in the program will increase their GPA by 10% during the semester, or 80% of program participants will remain employed for 6 months. So those are sample of targets that we would relate to both outputs and outcomes, because we want to know for each program or each strategy that we fund or that we implement, we want to know how productive they are, and we want to set goals around that. Is the program going to serve 10 kids, or is it going to serve 1,000? And we want to set goals around our outcomes. What is that accountability measure that we're trying to achieve? Is it 75%? Is it 80%? Is it 60%? As we move forward. Finally, the definition is a strategy. And a strategy is a specific activity or a program or a set of activities, programs that are linked together to achieve a common purpose. So to achieve community level results, we need to employ a variety of strategies, including programs, and I call those services that we provide. So when agencies, programs provide services, that becomes service. The other side of that is what we call care from the asset-based community development world. And what we mean by care is when community or resident action is engaged, because it really takes both care and service to achieve community-wide results. And again, I'm going to specifically do a webinar next week on the 14th around how do we engage care and how do we increase care in a community as a funder. But also other strategies would include advocacy, public policy advocacy, lobbying, media work, as well as a whole host of other strategies. So as you begin to think about what do you need to do to change that community-wide indicator, it's very clear that you have to do a whole host of things. That's why no one program, no one strategy is responsible, but collectively you have a much better chance to make the community-wide change that you're trying to achieve. So here's some sample strategies. If we were specifically, for example, looking at the issue of early education, making sure that more kids start school ready to learn and succeed, or the indicator may be third grade reading scores, whatever that indicator is, to change that, to make sure that more kids can read at third grade level by third grade, it takes a whole host of things, including improving the quality of early care and education centers by doing teacher training or accreditation of early education centers. It takes promoting early literacy, doing things like neighborhood book drives to make sure that there are books in all the low-income homes that have kids. Support parent education through parent mentoring programs, improving nutrition and oral health, making sure that kids that are eligible are enrolled in the state's health insurance, children's health insurance program, the S-CHIP program. It takes enhancing community awareness, and it takes some public policy work to help increase funding for early education, increase student or decrease student-teacher ratios, whatever that may be. So this is a sample of all the kind of strategies that we have to employ and be able to track if we are going to actually make a difference around the issue of early education. So just to summarize the definitions, the community-wide impact statement goal, that's the expected population improvement that we're trying to impact. At the program strategy level, outputs measure productivity. Outcomes state expected changes around behavior, circumstances, attitudes, or knowledge. Indicators measure expected changes. Targets provide the accountability goals of expected changes. And strategies and programs, those are the activities that we believe are required to achieve the goals that we've identified. So the community-wide data. Identify the community-level indicators and data required to drive your impact agenda. As funders, again, becoming much more focused around some key community indicators because we need to set our North Star. Are we focusing on education? Are we focusing on health? Are we focusing on income? What are those issues that we are, in fact, focusing on? And again, community level data, as I said, define the issues. You need to make sure that your goals are defined in a clear, understandable term, and that you've identified ways to collect that indicator data, whether that's from the school districts, health departments, census data, etc. And when you report the data, as you begin to look at this at the community-wide level, it's important that the data that you look at and you look to collect, the indicators, if you will, have some key components. The first one is they have to have strong communication power. Will the community funders and donors understand what you mean, understand the data? Because if you're collecting things that are not very easily understandable, you can't build your case as strong as you need to in a community. So for example, if your issue is you want to have more kids succeed in school, life, and work, if you will, be prepared to become contributing adults, if that's your overarching goal, you want to look for an indicator, and a good indicator around that potentially would be high school graduation or being admitted to college, the percent of kids that are admitted to college, things like that, because those have strong communication power. People understand what graduating from high school means. They understand what reducing the dropout rate means. If you highlight that kids are supposed to do better on the XYZ test, that is not as strong. That doesn't have as much communication power because many people won't know, is an 80 a good score or a bad score on the XYZ test. So just reporting test scores is not as strong, doesn't have as much communication power as things like graduation rate and items like that. The other key component is you want to make sure that it does relate very understandably to your community-wide impact strategy. So does it make sense? Are we looking at high school graduation? Does that make sense then related to your overarching goal? Also, you do not need to report everything because data typically travels in herds, as Mark Friedman says. Because again, if you have data, typically all that data will be going the same way, so you don't have to collect everything. Just look for those items that they have the strongest communication power and have and relate strongly to your overarching goal and collect that data. At the strategy level, at the program level, you may need to collect more information so that an agency, a strategy, can make the mid-course corrections that they need. But at the community-wide level, you don't need to report everything. Just look for those one or two indicators, that one or two data elements that really will tell your story to the strongest point possible. And finally, you want to make sure that it's easily collectible and replicable. You don't want to collect something that's very hard to collect, that you can't do it every 2 years, every 3 years, every 1 year, or it's very expensive. because then you may not be able to do it in another year or two because of funding. So you want to make sure that you found things that are easily collectible and replicable. For example, that's why the Census Bureau, which again typically did the 10-year census in today's world, they knew they needed more relative data on more real time, which is why they began to do the American Community Survey. So if you're in a community that is large enough that they actually are doing the American Community Survey, now you have access to much more data that is very much more helpful than waiting every 10 years for the census. So that's another example of how we want to look to make sure that the data is easily collectible and replicable. So let's talk about some examples again, collected from community-wide data sources. So if we're looking at school district data, here's an example of tracking dropout rates over time. If we're looking at, again, also looking at just total students, dropouts, those graduated, the dropout rates, so you can begin to collect that and report that. By the way, all of these graphs were generated through our software at CTK and our Community Impact ODM system. Community-wide data relevant to graduation rates again. At the low-income households, tracking again the number total households in a community and the total number of lower-income households. Here's an example of tracking both of those in Fulton County, for example, drilling down from the American Community Survey to report those results so that you can track that. Again, collected from the Center of Disease Control, looking at obesity rates for both boys and girls so that you can begin to track that and see over time, are you in fact making a difference relative to your community-wide strategies. At the national level for United Way, for those of you that are United Way members, as you know, we have a number of goals, cut by half the number of students who drop out in the education arena. And the target, as you can see, is 74% in 2006 to 87% in 2008. So that we have 5,600 more seniors graduating, getting a diploma on time. And the indicator then is high school graduation rates. And that data is collected from the National Center for Educational Statistics, a national organization that collects that data at a community-wide level so that you have that information. Around the income level, again, target is to create more stable lower income families, working families. The indicator is percent of working families, and they define that as families that are working 50 or more weeks a year with incomes more than 250% of the poverty level. That data is collected from the Census Bureau and the American Community Survey. So again, through utilizing this free source, you can have access to this data. And at the health arena, the target around 1.9 million more healthy young people in 2018. Using CDC data, looking at the percent of grade 9 to 12 students who report not being involved in violence, non-smoking, drug abuse, alcohol binge drinking, and they practiced abstinence or safe sex, and not being overweight. So from the CDC, they do a survey that provides this information that for those of you that are United Ways, United Way Worldwide is collecting for you so that you have this information at the national level, and then depending on your community size at the community level as well. So just to summarize again, strategy program level is collected from agencies and partners, neighborhoods, whoever is responsible for implementing the strategy. And here's some examples. Again, we were talking about community level indicators. Now you also have to have the ability to look at strategy or program level data. So here's an example of tracking after school programs and their outputs, the number of kids in the program, the number of units of service, or their outcomes, how many kids did do better, and I'll talk about this in a little while as a more detailed example. So what I'd like to do is talk about, previous to joining CTK in 2010, I was with the United Way of Tucson in southern Arizona, and I'm going to show you an example from how we looked at this at both the community-wide level as well as the program and strategy level to help drive our results. And again, for a couple of you on the webinar, I know you saw this as part of the 101, but since the large majority of participants were not at the 101, webinar, I'm going to go ahead and use this same example because it really does tell the story of how you use data to effectively become a learning community, a learning organization, and drive your work. So our goals, again, looking at the community-wide indicator, we had 3 goals that we were driving for the United Way in Tucson around education. Youth are ready by 21, ready for college, work, and life. That was our overarching community-wide goal. And one of our indicators around that was high school graduation rates in Pima County. So we were tracking the 4-year graduation rate so we could see the impact of what we were doing over time. In education, because we know that early education is so important as part of a strategy, but we couldn't wait for the kids that are in early education now to graduate from high school, we also tracked 3rd grade reading scores. So one of our other population results was all children 0 to 5 in Pima County enter kindergarten eager to learn and ready to succeed in life. So we were tracking 3rd grade reading scores because people understand that, and it's very clear that it's important that the kids can read at 3rd grade reading levels by 3rd grade. In the income area, families have a sustainable income. That was our population result, and we were tracking the percent of individuals living with a sustainable income level, for example, and we set it at 200% of the federal poverty level in Pima County for 2 reasons. One, that 200% seemed to be a livable wage in Tucson, in Pima County, and also that data is collected by the American Community Survey. The 250% that United Way Worldwide is using actually is a special run that they had to have developed. 200% fits, but again, in your community, if 200% is not a livable wage, you may need to do something else. In Pima County's case, we were able to do that. In the health arena, we were primarily focusing on seniors, and our population result were seniors are healthy and maintain maximum independence. And our indicators around that were the percent of the Pima County population, 65 and older, reporting an independent living difficulty, and the percent of Pima County population, 65 and older, reporting a self-care difficulty. And this data is collected from the American Community Survey. So again, we were able to utilize a free data source to put this together so that we could begin to look at the issue of how many seniors are able to live in their own home longer, because that was our key goal, and utilizing the American Community Survey results, we could do that. And I do have 2 questions here, so I'm going to stop and answer those very quickly. One person asked, why do you use the terminology population result instead of outcome? The reason I use population result is just to make a little difference when we're talking about community-wide indicators versus agency indicators or program or strategy indicators, just to make it a little clearer, because again, wanting people to know that you can't roll up individual outcomes into community-wide results, I tend to use the term population result when I talk about community level results, and outcomes when I talk about agency or program level. But again, you can also use the term outcome at the community level. I just choose not to make it clearer. This is also driven by some work from, again, Mark Friedman and results-based accountability, which is what we used in Tucson. And I have another question of where can we find validated community data collection tools that can be used at the community-wide level? I think I addressed some of those, hopefully, but again, looking at the census data, looking at the CDC, looking at school district or education institutions is a great way to start to begin to look at that validated data. And we can talk more about that a little later as well. So this sets the stage at the community-wide level. I have another question here. How far back do you track? Some results go back to 99, others go back to 2004. It really depends on what you want to identify and what the trend is you're trying to look at. The more you can go back, you can really see the trend, but the data may not be available to go that far back. So it's really a balancing act of when is the data available that is replicable over time, and just getting enough years so that you can see a trend, because what you want to do is change the trend relative to these outcomes. Another person asked, what about data collection tools specific to program strategy levels? I'm going to talk a little bit about that right now in this example, so you will see some of that. So again, the United Way Tucson set our stage around education, income, and health. Now to drill down about one example in that arena was, as part of our education strategies, we had one of our strategies was an after-school program. And we had an after-school program that we funded, or after-school programs that we funded that were based on skill development around after-school programming. So our community-wide impact goal or area was education. Our indicator was increasing graduation rates. Our outputs for this strategy were the number of youth served and the units of service provided. Our strategy outcome for all of the agencies that we funded that did after-school programming was that youth developing skills competencies in an out-of-school time program that prepares them for college, work, or life. So that was our outcome. Our strategy indicator was results from pre- and post-tests. We got all of the agencies that we funded to agree to use the same pre- and post-test. So when all the youth went into the after-school program, they were given a pre-test, and then every quarter they were giving a post-test, because we were collecting data every quarter because it's important to make mid-course corrections. You don't want to wait a year to find out something's not working, and even in some cases waiting 6 months is too long to find out whether a strategy or an activity is working or not. And then our strategy targets, our accountability, was focused on, for the goal, 4,428 youth to be served in the after-school programs, and 10,000 units of service to be provided, which were after-school days. And our outcome goal was 60% of the youth participants will score higher on their post-skills test, so that we had the accountability set relative to these goals. So what we, first to set the stage, again back to the graduation rate, which we collected this from the school district, so we could look over time to see whether there was a change in the graduation rate. And then from that, at the strategy program level data, how did we collect that information, which is again collected from the agencies responsible for implementing the strategy or program. We had a quarterly reporting form utilizing CTK's system. So in this form, the agency would report every quarter. So this is a sample of a fourth quarter report for this agency, and this is a fictitious agency at this point. A fourth quarter report for their after-school program. And the target for this agency was 3,000 kids. Their output, their goal was to serve 3,000 kids during the year. This quarter they served 589 for a total for the year of 2,595. We were also tracking units of service because we wanted to know, were they doing 1 day of service or 2 days, or for each kid what were they doing. So our target was afternoons of after-school programming. This agency said that they would provide 4,500 afternoon days of after-school activity, and this quarter they did 947, and a total for the year of 4,619. The output, and then the outcome reporting, was youth developing skills competencies in an out-of-school time program to prepare them for college, work, and life. And our indicator, as I mentioned, was the pre- and post-test. So this agency said that their goal was 1,000 of their kids. If you remember, they're serving 3,000, so they said of the 3,000, 1,000 would do better on their post-test. This quarter, 185 did better, and a total for the year of 967 did better. So this is how we could easily collect from the agencies every quarter information on how many kids they were serving and how many kids were doing better on the post-test. And then we began to track that utilizing the system. And this is important, again, whether you're using ours or any system, to be able to do this so you can make mid-course corrections. So for example, this is reporting their results to us every quarter as to how many kids they were serving and the units of service. So this is the output tracking. And one of the things you can see very quickly is that this agency, Brighter Tomorrows, the first 2 quarters, they were only at 15% of the total. So unless it's a special summer program, they should have been doing at least 25% each quarter to meet their goal relative to the number of youth served in the program. So you can track that very quickly, and then you can see by the 3rd quarter they caught up because they had a large enrollment on the 3rd quarter. So you can see that, so you can make those mid-course corrections. If you see an agency that's not serving the number of kids or enrolling the number of kids that they need to have in their program, you can track that in real time so that you can intervene, potentially link them up with other agencies that are being more successful to see if they can learn something. So at the end of the year, we were able to highlight that our goal was 4,428 youth in the program, as you remember, relative to the accountability. And during the year, 4,738 youth were served. So we were actually able to exceed the goal. And so you have this information so you can go back to your community, go to your volunteers, to your donors, and highlight, thanks to your support, we were able to exceed the goal. If you weren't exceeding the goal, though, that would give you an opportunity to begin to look at new strategies to recruit additional youth into these programs. At the demographic level, if that's important, you need to collect demographic data so you know you're serving the most at-risk kids, if you will. So you can track demographics both at the individual agency and program level as well as collectively so that you know that you are in fact achieving serving the kids that you wanted to serve in this program. Now moving on to the outcome achievement piece. Again, as you remember, each agency is reporting their results each quarter relative to the number of kids that are doing better on their post-tests. So as you can see here, Brighter Tomorrows, again, their goal was 1,000 kids to do better on their post-test, and you can see the results each quarter. 457 the first quarter, 165 the second, 160 and 185. So you can track that as a percentage as well, or look at it graphically just to make sure that agencies are on track. From that, you can look to see how they did. Again, this is the year-end report, but you could run this at every quarter, this similar kind of report, so that you can see where the agencies are in relation to their goals or their targets. Brighter Tomorrows, as you remember, their goal was 1,000 youth to do better on the post-test. 967 did better this quarter, so they're down 3%. That's probably within the margin of error. But Leaders of Tomorrow, they were down 18%. So you might want to look at that and intervene, because rather than just not funding them next year, if you will, one of the things we would work to do is connect them with these other 3 agencies that you see exceeded their goals, so that potentially they could learn some things. So what is Sunrise Youth Services doing that they were actually able to exceed their goal in skill development, so that you can begin to create some synergies and connections between the agencies that are all part of this strategy. Because again, remember, we have 5 different agencies, 5 different programs, but because they're all reporting the same indicators, which was the number of youth served and the number of units of service provided, all defined the same, and the same outcome, using the same pre- and post-test, you can roll up this data into a strategy of 5 agencies working together that creates the strategy of a skill development after-school program. And so you can begin to collect this information so you can make the mid-course corrections that are necessary. And again, dashboarding it. So collectively, in this example, the 5 agencies collectively actually exceeded the goal, and more youth learned new skills being involved in this program and the after-school program during the year. So that's an example from Tucson, the United Way in Tucson, of how we were able to utilize data to make mid-course corrections, to work with the agencies and programs and create a strategy that is related to the overarching goal of changing graduation rates. But again, as you can imagine, just to reiterate, this one after-school program or this after-school strategy of funding 5 agencies in of itself cannot alone impact the graduation rate. But this activity, along with a whole host of other activities in the community, of mentoring, of working with teachers, of working with the school district, of doing media kinds of activities, working in the neighborhoods, all of those activities together has the potential to, in fact, increase the graduation rate in the community. Somebody asked how many people are on the webinar today, and we actually have 63 people that joined the webinar today. So it really is a great participation in this webinar today. So thank you all for joining this webinar, and I hope you're finding it helpful. Somebody asked, so how are you able to talk to donors about your impact on graduation rates? So I think the key is around that is being clear that your goal is to impact the graduation rate, so that you can show that and show the indicator you're using, which is being very clear that we're trying to impact the graduation rate. At the same time, being very clear that no one program is responsible for changing that impact rate, but you can talk about the results that you are achieving at your program or strategy level, because for many donors, they're just as excited about individual program success as the overarching success. So as I showed here, again, you can talk about two donors that thanks to your support in these programs, we were able to exceed the number of kids that were involved in the program. You can also highlight that thanks to your support or through our work, more kids were able to learn new skills in this program. So you can talk about program level results to donors, but just be clear that you're really talking at two levels. One, this is the overarching goal we're trying to achieve. It takes a whole host of activities to do that, and here in these activities we are being successful, and that increases our likelihood, our chance, our opportunity to impact the overarching goal. Yes, I will be sending a PowerPoint. I will be sending at the conclusion of this afternoon a copy of the PowerPoint I'm using. You will also have the ability to download the recorded version if you would like of this webinar today. Question about census data. If you go to the U.S. Census Bureau's website, you can either look at the 10-year census or you can go to the tabs around the American Community Survey, and if your community is large enough and they do the American Community Survey in your community, you can download that data directly from that database so that you have access to that information. And I'd be glad to, if you want to email me afterwards, to talk to you some more detail about that as well and show you some examples of that. So utilizing technology, I just want to do another quick poll to see how many of you are using technology already to do this and are able to do these things and able to track this on a real-time basis. So if you could just take a few minutes to vote. All right, looks about 60%. About 60% are already using technology, and about 40% are not. So again, this is a great opportunity to begin to do that. I do want to talk a little bit now about technology and how that really can help you. The power of technology, because you need to make mid-course corrections, because we're dealing with complicated or complex problems, and when we deal with complex problems, the variables change, people change. Again, as you know, in dealing in the world of complex problems, which is where we do, you can't do just the same thing to everybody and everybody will come out with the same result. You have to have information so that you can make mid-course corrections, and technology really enables us to begin to do that. As you remember, and certainly when I started my career as a funder at the United Way, many years ago, where we got paper reports from agencies, we would basically look to see did they submit their report and went in a file drawer, because we didn't really have the ability to make cross connections between that data, to collate that data. It was just too hard to do. So with technology, you can begin to do that. Technology also enables you to streamline and facilitate your grant making process through application, submittal, proposal, reviews, and decision making and reporting, which actually frees up more time so that you can develop and help support the wide variety of strategies that it takes to make a difference. Technology also enables you to enhance your communication between your agencies and partners and key stakeholders so that you can work together in a more collaborative fashion, and it improves your ability to get results and tell your story to your donors and to your funders. So with technology, again, agencies can submit their information when you need it. It's submitted in a uniform fashion so you can make correlations. Agencies see their information used by funders. One of the things, again, going back to the old days, when we collected the information and all it did was go into a file folder, agencies had really no advantage to submit the information because they never saw it being used effectively. In our case, in Tucson and in others, when you have the information and you can begin to dashboard it and show that literally we would get at the end of the quarter, by the end of the month after the end of the quarter, we had that all dashboarded. We were sending it out, putting it on our website, sending it out to the agencies. So the agencies saw that their information was being used effectively, and that helped drive that they were willing to be partners in sharing the information. It also gives the agencies the ability to have more information so that they can make their own mid-course corrections based on new information that they're collecting. So technology is really kind of where we need to move in today's world so that we can make the mid-course corrections. So let me stop again now, and in the few minutes we have remaining, and see if there are any other further questions. Again, please type, because of the number of people we have, if you wouldn't mind just writing in your question, and I'll be glad to answer it. Okay, while folks are doing that, I do want to highlight that I'm doing a webinar next Tuesday, February 14th, Valentine's Day, on effective community level strategies for greater impact and results. So I'm going to talk about how do we, I've talked a lot about programs today. Next week I'm going to talk about how do we engage neighbors, residents, the community to become part of the solution that we want to achieve, because as I highlighted, it takes both care and service. So next week I'm going to talk about how do we unlock the resources, the assets, the gifts as we call them, in a community to help drive greater results. So that is next week, and again, when you get this PowerPoint this afternoon, you can click on that link to register for next week's webinar. And I see we do have another question. A question about when reporting info derived from agencies, have you had any concerns about client privacy? Some agencies may be concerned about having a community foundation showing too much. That's a great question. I think in most cases what we're collecting is aggregate data, not individual client data. So for most funders, they don't want to know the individual names or the individual clients. They just want to know, of your 100 youth in your program, how many of them did better on the post-test, on how many of them were graduated on time, whatever that may be. So it is important that we do maintain that confidentiality, and in most cases, most funders just want the aggregate level data that is not tied to any individual person or name. See if there are any other questions. Was there any pushback from the agencies about sharing their results with everyone? I think that's, again, part of the issue of the goal that we have to set in today's world, is that it is about accountability. And so if agencies are going to be funded, one of the requirements is that they need to be held accountable to their results, and that data and information needs to be shared. Again, you may decide whether you're going to aggregate that and not display individual agency data. Again, it depends on what you're trying to achieve. But the key for me is, in Tucson and my other work, we really tried to create partnerships between the agencies, between the programs and the services we were funding, so that we were all working together and on the same page, and understanding that accountability is critical, results are critical, and we need to work together to achieve that. So if you build that trust, I think the key is really that we have to have trust, because if you think about collaborations, and in many cases this is what we're talking about, are collaborations. When we're doing collaborations, part of I think my understanding of collaborations from my experience is that organizations don't collaborate, people do, and collaborations are based on partnerships and based on trust. So the key is working with agencies to create that kind of trust relationship, so that they don't think the data is just there to catch them messing up, if you will, or catch them not being successful. But the reason for collecting data is to help them be successful, to help the collaborative be successful, because that's why we're involved in the community, is because we're trying to make it a better place. It looks like I have gotten all of the questions answered, so I want to thank you all for taking time today for the webinar. When you log off, there should be a questionnaire survey about the webinar, so please take a few minutes to fill out that webinar, or that questionnaire, because I use that information as to improve webinars into the future as we move forward, so that I get feedback about new topics that you would like to see for the webinars next quarter, and other activities that we can do to help support your work. So please take a few minutes to complete the survey, and if you have any questions, please feel free to email me or call me. Again, you will have that information on my email that I will send to you. So I really want to thank you for participating. I hope you will join me for the webinar next Tuesday about community level strategies, and have a great rest of your week. And again, thank you very much for joining us. This is Dan Duncan from CTK Community Tech Knowledge. Thank you.